The ballroom was supposed to be empty. Officer James Whitmore had walked these palace corridors for 11 years. He knew every portrait, every echo, every shadow. But tonight, something was different. It was just past midnight when he heard it. A voice soft at first, then stronger. Coming from the grand ballroom where no one should be at this hour, his hand moved instinctively to his radio. Then he stopped. The voice wasn't angry. It wasn't distressed. It was practicing. James moved closer to the ornate double doors, careful to keep his footsteps silent on the marble floor. Through the small gap where the doors didn't quite meet, he could see her. Lady Louise Windsor stood alone in the center of the massive ballroom. The chandeliers were dimmed to almost nothing. Just enough light to cast long shadows across the polished floor. She was 20 years old. But in that moment, she looked both younger and older. Her hands trembled slightly as she held a stack of papers. Her voice cracked on certain words. Distinguished guests. She began, then stopped. Her shoulders sagged. No, that's not right. She started again. Your Majesty's distinguished guests and friends. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe. We share the most emotional royal stories you won't hear anywhere else. James knew he should leave. This was clearly private, but something kept him frozen in place. Lady Louise had always been different from the other young royals. While her cousins dominated headlines with glamorous appearances and celebrity friendships, Louise seemed to prefer the shadows. She attended university like any normal student. She worked part-time jobs. She avoided the spotlight with an almost desperate intensity. So what was she doing here? Alone practicing a speech in the middle of the night? I stand before you today not as a member of the royal family, Louise continued, her voice gaining strength, but as someone who understands what it means to feel invisible. James felt his chest tighten. There was raw emotion in those words, pain that seemed too deep for someone so young. Louise paced across the ballroom floor, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. She wore simple jeans and a sweater. No jewelry, no makeup. Just a young woman who looked exhausted and determined in equal measure. For years I watched from the sidelines, she said, addressing the empty room as if it were filled with thousands. I saw my grandmother work tirelessly. I saw my family carry burdens that would break most people. And I wondered, what could I possibly offer? She paused, looking down at her papers. Her hand brushed away what might have been a tear. Then I realized something. The silence that followed was heavy. James found himself leaning closer, desperate to hear what came next. I realized that being invisible gave me a gift, Louise said quietly. I could see things others couldn't. I could hear the voices that powerful people often miss. I could understand the struggles of ordinary people, because I've lived more like them than like a princess. James's mind raced. What was this speech for? Why was she practicing it alone, in secret, in the middle of the night? Then Louise did something unexpected. She walked to the edge of the ballroom and sat down on the floor, cross-legged like a child. She set the papers aside and put her head in her hands. I can't do this, she whispered to the empty room. They'll never take me seriously. I'm just Louise, the quiet one, the one nobody notices. In that moment, James saw something that made his heart ache. This wasn't just a young royal practicing a speech. This was someone standing at the edge of something terrifying and brave. Someone about to step out of the shadows and into a light that could either illuminate or burn. And she was utterly, completely alone. James stood frozen outside the ballroom doors, knowing he had just witnessed something he was never meant to see. But what he didn't know yet was why. What was Lady Louise preparing for? And why did it feel like everything was about to change? James should have walked away. Protocol demanded it. But his feet wouldn't move. Louise stood up from the floor, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. She picked up her papers again, straightening them with shaking hands. Then she did something that surprised him even more. She walked to the palace piano in the corner of the ballroom. The instrument was a masterpiece. Rarely touched except during state dinners and royal receptions, Louise sat down at the bench and placed her fingers on the keys. She didn't play. She just sat there, staring at the ivory keys as if they held answers to questions she couldn't speak out loud. "Grandmother used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear," Louise said softly to the empty room. "It's doing what matters even when you're terrified." James felt like an intruder, but he couldn't leave. There was something happening here that felt bigger than just a rehearsal. Louise's phone buzzed on top of the piano. She glanced at it and her expression changed. Her jaw tightened. Whatever the message said, it had struck a nerve. She stood abruptly and returned to the center of the ballroom. This time, when she spoke, her voice was different, stronger, almost defiant. "I know what they say about me," she said, addressing the invisible audience again. "That I'm too quiet, too ordinary, that I lack the charisma of my cousins, the presence of my parents. They say I hide because I have nothing to offer." She paused, and James could see her hands curl into fists. "They're wrong." The words echoed across the ballroom with unexpected force. "I've spent my life watching, listening, learning, while others were chasing headlines. I was visiting hospitals with no cameras. While others were at celebrity parties, I was sitting with veterans who had no one else to listen to their stories. While others were building brands, I was trying to understand what it really means to serve." James's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a speech. This was a declaration. "In 3 days," Louise continued, her voice wavering only slightly, "I will stand before the world and announce something that will change everything. Some will call it naive. Others will call it unnecessary. My own family—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "My own family thinks I should wait, that I'm too young, that I don't understand the consequences." 3 days. Something was happening in 3 days. James's mind raced through the palace schedule. There was a major charitable summit planned. Leaders from around the world were coming. The press would be everywhere. Was that it? Was Louise planning to make some kind of announcement? "But if I wait," Louise said, her voice breaking, "how many more will suffer? How many more will feel invisible, just like I did?" She moved to the tall windows that overlooked the palace gardens. Even in the darkness, James could see the outline of her reflection in the glass. She looked so small against the vast window, yet somehow, in this moment, she seemed larger than life. "They told me to let others handle it," she said quietly, "that I should focus on my studies, my private life. That speaking out would only draw unwanted attention to the family. But how can I stay silent when I know I could make a difference?" Louise pressed her palm against the cold glass. Grandmother never stayed silent. Even when it was difficult, even when it was unpopular. She did what was right, not what was easy. The mention of her grandmother, the late Queen, hung in the air like a ghost. James had served during Queen Elizabeth's final years. He'd seen the special bond between the Queen and this particular granddaughter. While other royals had been groomed for public life, Louise had been allowed to fade into the background. He'd always thought it was a kindness, giving her a normal life. Now he wondered if it had been preparation for something else entirely. Louise returned to the center of the room one more time. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began again. "Your Majesties, distinguished guests, and friends, I stand before you today not as a member of the royal family, but as someone who refuses to be invisible anymore." Her voice was steady now, confident, almost unrecognizable from the trembling young woman he'd first heard. "For too long, we've treated mental health as a whisper topic, something to hide, something to be ashamed of. We smile for cameras while people we love are drowning in silence. We attend charity events for mental health awareness while ignoring the crisis happening in our own homes, our own communities, our own minds." It's James's breath caught. Mental health. That's what this was about. "I'm here to tell you that I understand that silence," Louise continued, "because I've lived it. After my grandmother died, I struggled in ways I couldn't explain to anyone. The world saw a princess who should be grateful for her privilege. But inside, I felt like I was disappearing." Her honesty was stunning, raw, the kind of vulnerability that royals were trained never to show. "I'm done hiding," Louise said firmly. In 3 days, I will announce the creation of a new foundation. One that focuses on mental health support for young people who feel invisible, the ones who don't fit society's expectations, the ones who struggle in silence because they think no one cares. James understood now. This wasn't just a speech. This was Louise stepping out of the shadows and into a role she'd been preparing for her its entire life. But why was she doing this alone in the middle of the night? The answer came a moment later when Louise's phone buzzed again. She looked at the screen, and this time, James saw her face crumble. She read the message out loud, her voice barely above a whisper. "Louise, please reconsider. The family cannot support this right now. The timing is wrong. You'll regret this." She set the phone down carefully, as if it might shatter. Then she picked up her papers and started again, tears streaming down her face. But her voice never breaking, because Lady Louise Windsor had made her decision. And in 3 days, nothing would ever be the same. James finally stepped away from the ballroom doors. His mind was spinning. He'd witnessed something he wasn't supposed to see. A private moment of doubt and determination from a member of the royal family. The right thing to do was forget it, continue his rounds, maintain his professional distance. But he couldn't. The next morning, James reported for his shift as usual. The palace was buzzing with activity. Staff rushed through corridors preparing for the upcoming summit. Security teams ran through protocols. Caterers delivered supplies. Everything looked normal. But James couldn't shake what he'd seen. He spotted Lady Louise later that afternoon, walking through the East Gallery with an older woman he recognized as Catherine Blackwell, a former diplomat and now one of the palace's senior advisors. Their conversation looked tense. "You're making a mistake," Catherine said, her voice low but firm. "You're 20 years old, Louise. You have your entire life to do this. Why now? Why like this?" Louise's expression was calm, but James could see the steel beneath it. "'Cause people are dying, Catherine. Young people. Every single day. And we keep talking about mental health like it's someone else's problem." "This isn't about whether the cause is worthy," Catherine replied. "It's about protocol. Timing. You're going around the family. You haven't consulted the king. You haven't even told your parents the full extent of what you're planning." "I've tried," Louise said quietly. "They told me to wait, to let someone with more experience handle it. But when? How many years should I wait while people suffer?" Catherine's expression softened. "I understand your passion. But the world is harsh on young royals who speak out." "Look at what happened to I Know What Happened," Louise interrupted. "I've seen how the press destroys people, how one mistake can define you forever. I'm not naive, Catherine. I'm scared. But I'm more scared of staying silent." James pretended to examine a painting on the wall, but he was listening to every word. "If you do this," Catherine said carefully, "there's no going back. The family will have to respond. The press will scrutinize every aspect of your life. They'll dig into your past, your relationships, your struggles. Everything you're trying to help others with will be used against you." Louise nodded slowly. "I know. And you're still going through with it?" "I have too." Catherine studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. It was small, almost sad, but genuine. "You remind me of her, you know," Catherine said softly. "Your grandmother. That same stubborn determination to do what's right, even when everyone tells you to stop." Louise's eyes glistened. She would understand. "Yes," Catherine agreed. She would. But she would also tell you to be strategic, to build alliances, to prepare for the backlash. She paused. "Let me help you." Louise looked surprised. "You'll help me? Even though you think I'm making a mistake?" "I think your timing could be better and your approach could be more polished," Catherine corrected. "But your heart is in the right place. And if you're determined to do this, you shouldn't do it alone." Relief washed over Louise's face. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Catherine said. "We have 3 days to make sure you don't destroy yourself in the process of trying to help others." They walked away together, their voices fading down the corridor. James finally moved from his position, his heart heavy with everything he'd heard that evening. He saw something else that made the situation even more complicated. Prince Edward. Louise's father stood in one of the private sitting rooms. Speaking urgently on the phone, James was stationed outside the door, close enough to hear. "I'm telling you, she won't listen," Edward said, frustration clear in his voice. "She's got this idea in her head, and nothing we say makes a difference." Pause. "Yes, I understand the optics. I understand the timing is terrible. But what am I supposed to do? Lock her in her room? She's an adult. She's making her own choices." Another pause. Edward's voice dropped lower. "I know she's been struggling. Since the funeral, she hasn't been the same. Maybe that's exactly why she shouldn't be doing this. She's not thinking clearly." James felt his stomach turn. They thought she wasn't thinking clearly. That her passion for mental health advocacy came from a place of instability rather than purpose. "I'll try talking to her again," Edward said, sounding defeated. "But I'm not optimistic. When Louise makes up her mind about something, she's like her grandmother that way." There it was again. The comparison to Queen Elizabeth. Everyone could see it except those trying to stop her. The next day, James noticed increased security around Lady Louise. Not protective security surveillance. They were watching her, making sure she didn't do anything unexpected before the summit. He saw her in the palace library that afternoon, surrounded by stacks of research papers and documents. Her eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but she worked with focused intensity. Catherine sat across from her, reviewing something on a laptop. "The statistics are powerful," Catherine said. "But you need personal stories too. People connect with stories, not numbers." "I have stories," Louise replied quietly. "My own, my friends. People who reached out to me after grandmother died, sharing their own struggles. Will you share your own story?" Publicly, Louise hesitated. "I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about them. About everyone who's suffering in silence." "It has to be about you too," Catherine said gently. "That's what makes it real. That's what makes people listen. A princess admitting she struggled with mental health. That's powerful, Louise. That breaks down barriers. It also makes me vulnerable." "Yes, but vulnerability is strength, not weakness. Your grandmother understood that better than anyone." Louise was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Okay, I'll share my story. But only if it helps someone else feel less alone." James watched from across the library, pretending to check the security of the windows. These two women were preparing for something that could either change everything or destroy a young woman who only wanted to help. He thought about his own daughter, who'd struggled with anxiety throughout her teenage years. He thought about the shame they'd felt as a family, the secrecy, the fear of judgment. What Lady Louise was trying to do was brave, impossibly brave. But would bravery be enough when the whole world was watching? That night, James returned to his patrol route. As he passed the grand ballroom, he paused. The lights were on again, and once more he heard her voice. But this time she wasn't alone. James approached the ballroom doors carefully. Through the gap, he could see Louise standing at a podium that hadn't been there before. Catherine sat in one of the chairs, watching intently. But there was someone else, a young woman, probably Louise's age, sat in the front row. She wore casual clothes and looked nervous, her hands twisted in her lap. "Thank you for coming, Emma," Louise said warmly. "I know this is uncomfortable," the young woman nodded. "It's okay. If sharing my story can help, then I want to do it." Catherine leaned forward. "Emma Louise wants to include real stories in her presentation, not just statistics. Would you be willing to tell us what you went through?" Emma took a shaky breath. "I was 16 when it started. The anxiety, the panic attacks. I couldn't explain it to anyone because I thought they'd think I was being dramatic. I had everything right. Good grades, good family, good life. How could I be struggling?" Louise's eyes filled with empathy. "That's exactly how I felt." "Really?" Emma looked surprised. "But you're royalty. I thought people like you didn't have problems like this." "That's the problem," Louise said softly. "Everyone thinks that. And it makes people like us feel even more isolated. Like we don't have the right to struggle Because we should be grateful. Emma nodded vigorously. Yes, exactly that. I felt so guilty for feeling bad when I had so much. James felt a lump form in his throat. His daughter had said almost the exact same words. What helped you? Louise asked gently. Finally talking to someone who didn't judge me, Emma replied. A teacher who noticed I was withdrawing. She didn't make a big deal out of it. She just listened. And then she helped me find a counselor who understood, and now I'm studying psychology. I want to help other people the way I was helped. Emma smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. But I almost didn't make it that far. There were nights when I didn't think I could keep going. The room fell silent. Louise walked over and sat down beside Emma, not above her at the podium, but next to her as an equal. Thank you for trusting me with your story, Louise said. Would you be willing to share it at the summit? You don't have to. But if you're comfortable, I'll do it, Emma interrupted. If it helps even one person feel less alone, I'll do it. Catherine made a note on her laptop. We'll need a few more stories. Different ages, different backgrounds. This can't be seen as just a wealthy person's initiative. I've contacts, Louise said. People who've reached out to me over the past year. I think I can convince them. Over the next hour, James watched as they worked. Louise wasn't just preparing a speech. She was building something real, something that could actually make a difference. But then Catherine's phone rang. Her expression changed as she listened. I see, she said quietly. Yes, I'll inform her. She hung up and looked at Louise with concern. I was a contact at the Telegraph. They're running a story tomorrow morning. Louise's face went pale. About the foundation? About you. Someone leaked that you've been struggling with mental health issues. They're framing it as a concern about your fitness for royal duties. The blood drained from Louise's face. How did they? Who would? Does it matter? Catherine asked gently. This is what we knew would happen. The question is how you respond. Emma looked between them, confused and alarmed. They're attacking her for the exact thing she's trying to help with. Welcome to the reality of public life, Catherine said dryly. Hypocrisy is standard practice. Louise stood abruptly and walked to the window. Her shoulders were tense, her breathing quick. James could see she was on the edge of panic. Everything she'd been preparing for was crumbling before it even began. Maybe they're right, Louise whispered. Maybe I'm not strong enough for this. Maybe I should just disappear again. Emma stood up and walked over to her. This ordinary young woman approached a princess without hesitation.
Ow.
Emma said firmly, You don't get to quit. You know why? Louise looked at her, surprised by the intensity. Because you're the only one who can do this, Emma continued. You think some perfect, polished royal with no problems is going to convince struggling kids that it's okay to ask for help? No, they need to see someone real. Someone who's been through it. Someone who's still going through it but refusing to give up. She's right, Catherine added. The leak might actually help us. It proves you're not just talking about mental health in theory. You've lived it. But my family. Louise's voice broke. They'll be mortified. They'll think I've brought shame too. Your grandmother fought her entire life against exactly this kind of thinking. She modernized the monarchy by making it human, by showing that royals aren't perfect, untouchable figures. They're people, and people struggle. Louise turned back to them, tears streaming down her face. I'm so scared. Good, Catherine said. Fear means it matters. Now, do we cancel tomorrow's announcement, or do we face this head on? The silence stretched. James found himself holding his breath. Finally, Louise wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. We face it head on, she said. But I need to do something first. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. It rang 3 times before someone answered. Dad? Louise's voice wavered. I need to talk to you. Can you come to the ballroom now? 20 minutes later, Prince Edward entered the ballroom. He looked tired and worried. When he saw Louise standing there with Catherine and Emma, his expression softened. Louise, what's this about? I need you to hear me, Louise said. Really hear me. Not as my father trying to protect me, but as someone who can understand why this matters. Edward glanced at Catherine and Emma, then back to his daughter. All right, I'm listening. Louise took a deep breath and began to speak. Not the polished speech she'd been practicing, but something raw and honest. When grandmother died, I didn't just lose her. I lost my anchor. The one person who made me feel like I could be myself, even in this family. And I fell apart, Dad. Completely apart. Edward's eyes glistened. I know. We saw it. But you didn't really see it, Louise said gently. You saw me crying at the funeral. You saw me withdraw, but you didn't see the nights I couldn't sleep, the days I couldn't eat, the moments I wondered if anyone would even notice if I just disappeared. Edward's face crumpled. Louise, I'm not telling you this to hurt you, she continued. I'm telling you because I survived it. I got help. I learned to cope. And now I have a chance to use that experience to help others. But I can't do it if you're trying to stop me. I'm not trying to stop you, Edward said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm trying to protect you from getting hurt. I know. But you can't protect me from everything. And if I don't do this, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Father and daughter stared at each other across the ballroom. Then Edward crossed the distance and pulled Louise into a hug. Mother and I have been so worried about you, he whispered. We didn't know how to help. Help me by supporting this, Louise said into his shoulder. That's all I need. When they pulled apart, Edward looked at Catherine and Emma, then back to Louise. Tell me everything. What's the plan? And for the first time, Louise smiled with real hope. The morning of the summit arrived, cold and gray. James reported early for his shift, knowing security would be intense, with world leaders arriving throughout the day. The Telegraph article had published as promised. The headline read, Concerns rise over Lady Louise's mental state as she plans major public initiative. It was as cruel as expected. But something unexpected had happened. The public reaction wasn't what the newspaper had anticipated. Social media exploded with support for Louise. Young people shared their own mental health struggles. Parents talked about their children's battles with anxiety and depression. Even some celebrities spoke out, praising Louise's bravery. The hashtag #IST, and with Louise, was trending worldwide. James saw Louise that morning in the corridor leading to the main hall. She was dressed simply but elegantly in a navy blue dress. Her hair was pulled back. She wore minimal makeup. She looked nervous but determined. Catherine walked beside her, reviewing last-minute details. The Telegraph's attempt to undermine you backfired spectacularly, Catherine said with satisfaction. Public sentiment is completely on your side. That could change in an instant, Louise replied quietly. Could. But right now, you have momentum. Use it. They passed James without seeming to notice him. But just as Louise moved beyond his position, she glanced back. Their eyes met for just a moment. James gave her a small nod of encouragement. He didn't know if she recognized him as the guard who'd been outside the ballroom that first night. But something in her expression softened. She nodded back, then continued toward her destiny. The main hall filled quickly. Dignitaries, ambassadors, charity leaders, and press packed every available space. Cameras lined the walls. The energy was electric. James was stationed near one of the side entrances. Watching everything unfold, Prince Edward and his wife Sophie sat in the front row, both looking anxious but supportive. Other members of the royal family were notably absent. The king had not come. That absence spoke volumes. The program began with speeches from various leaders about global health initiatives. Louise was scheduled to speak last, which meant she had to sit through 2 hours of presentations while her nerves built. James watched her from his position. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap. But he could see the slight tremor in her fingers, the way she kept taking slow, deliberate breaths. Finally, the moderator stood. And now we have a special announcement from Lady Louise Windsor, who has been working on a new initiative focused on youth mental health. The room's energy shifted. Everyone knew about the Telegraph article. Everyone was waiting to see if this young royal would crumble under pressure. Louise walked to the podium. The room fell completely silent. She stood there for a moment, looking out at hundreds of faces. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail of her expression. Then she began to speak. "Good afternoon. I'm Lady Louise Windsor, and I'm terrified right now." A ripple of surprise went through the audience. That wasn't how royal speeches typically began. "Public speaking has never been easy for me," Louise continued. "But that's not why I'm scared. I'm scared because what I'm about to share is deeply personal. And once I say it, I can't take it back." She paused, her hands gripping the edges of the podium. 2 years ago, I experienced my first panic attack. I was at university, sitting in a lecture hall, when suddenly, I couldn't breathe. My heart was racing. I was convinced I was dying. I ran out of the room, terrified and confused. James could see people in the audience leaning forward, completely captivated. "I didn't tell anyone," Louise said. "I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. I thought something was broken inside me. And I believed that if people found out, especially because of who I am, they would think I was weak." Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed forward. "After my grandmother passed away, everything got worse. The anxiety became constant. I struggled to sleep. I struggled to eat. I struggled to see any future where I felt normal again. And I thought about giving up, not on royal duties or my studies. On everything." The room was absolutely silent. You could hear people breathing. I'm sharing this not for sympathy, but because I know I'm not alone. Mental health struggles don't discriminate. They don't care if you're rich or poor, royal or common, successful or struggling. They can affect anyone. And the shame we attach to these struggles kills people every single day. Louise looked directly into the cameras. If you're watching this and you're struggling right now, please hear me. You are not weak. You are not broken. You are human. And asking for help is the bravest thing you can do. She took a breath and continued. "Today I'm announcing the creation of the Visibility Foundation. It will focus on mental health support for young people aged 16 to 25, with particular emphasis on those who feel invisible in society, those who think they don't matter, those who believe no one would notice if they disappeared." Emma, the young woman from the rehearsal, stood up in the audience. Then another young person stood. Then another. Within seconds, dozens of young people throughout the hall were standing in silent solidarity. Louise's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "The foundation will provide free counseling, peer support groups, and crisis intervention. But more importantly, it will create spaces where young people can be honest about their struggles without fear of judgment, where being vulnerable is seen as strength, not weakness." She pulled out a piece of paper, though James could tell she barely needed it now. "I've been told that announcing this initiative is risky, that being honest about my own mental health struggles could damage my reputation and embarrass my family, that I should wait until I'm older, more established, more perfect." Louise looked directly at where her parents sat. "But I watched my grandmother spend her entire life in service to others, and the lesson I learned from her wasn't to be perfect. It was to be purposeful, to use whatever platform you have, however small, to make a difference." Prince Edward was openly crying now. Sophie held his hand tightly. "So I'm choosing purpose over perfection," Louise declared. "I'm choosing honesty over image. I'm choosing to be visible even when it's terrifying, because I refuse to let anyone else feel as invisible as I once did." The applause started slowly, then built into a thunderous ovation. People throughout the hall stood, clapping, some crying, many visibly moved. Louise stood at the podium, overwhelmed. As the response washed over her, but James noticed something else. At the back of the hall, a door opened quietly. A single figure slipped in, standing against the wall where few would notice. It was the king. He'd come after all. As Louise concluded her speech and walked off the stage, James saw the king wipe his eyes. The man who'd refused to publicly support this initiative had heard every word. The summit continued. But Louise's speech dominated every conversation. Journalists rushed to file stories. Social media exploded with support. Leaders approached her personally to offer partnership and funding. But Louise herself disappeared. James found her an hour later in a small private chapel within the palace. She sat alone in one of the pews, her head bowed. He should have left her alone. But something made him step inside. "A lady," he said quietly. Louise looked up, surprised to see him. Her makeup was smudged from crying, but she smiled.
Ah.
"Officer Whitmore, isn't it?" James was surprised she knew his name. "Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to say, what you did today was remarkable." "You were there?" she asked. "In the hall. But I was also—" He hesitated, then decided she deserved honesty. "I was the guard on duty 3 nights ago. When you were practicing in the ballroom?" Understanding dawned in Louise's eyes. "You heard everything."
I did.
"I apologize for intruding on a private moment." Louise shook her head. "Don't apologize. It's strangely comforting to know someone witnessed that moment. The doubt, the fear, all of it. It makes what happened today feel more real. You've done something important, ma'am. Something that will save lives." "I hope so," Louise said softly. "I really hope so." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then James spoke again. "My daughter struggled with anxiety as a teenager. We didn't handle it well at first. We didn't understand. Your speech today. I wish we'd had something like your foundation when she needed it." "How is she now?" Louise asked with genuine concern. "She's better. Getting help made all the difference. But the shame we felt as a family, the isolation, it didn't need to be that way." "No," Louise agreed. "It didn't. Hopefully, after today, it won't be that way for others." James nodded and turned to leave, giving her privacy. "Officer Whitmore," Louise called after him. He turned back. "Thank you for not walking away that night. For bearing witness. Sometimes that's all we need. Someone who sees us and doesn't turn away." James felt his throat tighten. "You're going to change the world, Lady Louise." "Maybe," she said with a small smile. "But first, I'm just trying to change how we talk about being human." As James left the chapel, he thought about everything that had happened over these past 3 days. A young woman practicing a speech in the dark, a family learning to support instead of protect, a world beginning to shift toward honesty. But the story wasn't over yet. 6 months later, James stood in the same grand ballroom where he'd first heard Louise practicing her speech, but now it was transformed. Hundreds of young people filled the space, talking, laughing, some crying, all supporting each other. This was the first major event for the Visibility Foundation, and the turnout had exceeded everyone's expectations. Louise moved through the crowd effortlessly, no longer the nervous young woman practicing in the dark. She listened to stories, offered hugs, connected people with resources. She was in her element. Catherine stood beside James, watching with pride. "She's remarkable, isn't she?" Catherine said. "She is," James agreed. "I wasn't sure she could pull this off. Neither was I, if I'm honest. But she proved us all wrong." The foundation had grown faster than anyone anticipated. Donations poured in from around the world. Partnerships formed with schools, universities, and healthcare providers. Most importantly, young people were reaching out for help in record numbers. The conversation around mental health was changing. Prince Edward and Sophie arrived, greeted warmly by many in attendance. They'd become fierce advocates for the foundation, using their own platform to support Louise's mission. Even the king had eventually offered his endorsement. Though it had taken time and convincing, but the most surprising supporter had been the press. After the initial Telegraph article backfired, other media outlets had rallied around Louise's honesty. Stories focused on the positive impact of the foundation. Features highlighted young people whose lives had been saved by having somewhere to turn. Louise had become an unexpected icon for her generation. James watched as Emma, the young woman who'd shared her story at the summit, took the microphone to address the crowd. 6 months ago, I was terrified to speak publicly about my mental health journey, Emma said. But someone showed me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that honesty can heal. Lady Louise didn't just create a foundation. She created a movement, and we're all part of it now. Crowd erupted in applause. Louise stood to the side. deliberately out of the spotlight, letting others share their stories. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about everyone who'd ever felt invisible. Later, as the event wound down, James saw Louise slip away to that same balcony overlooking the gardens. Old habits, he supposed. He debated whether to follow, then decided she might appreciate the company. "May I join you, ma'am?" he asked from the doorway. Louise turned and smiled. "Of course, Officer Whitmore. Though you don't need to be so formal. We've been through quite a journey together, haven't we?" James stepped onto the balcony. "How are you feeling about everything?" Louise leaned against the railing, looking out at the darkening sky. Overwhelmed, grateful, exhausted, hopeful, all of it at once. "That sounds about right. You know what's strange?" Louise said thoughtfully. "I spent so much of my life trying to be invisible, trying to avoid attention and judgment. And now I've deliberately made myself visible in the most vulnerable way possible. Do you regret it?" "Not for a second," Louise said firmly. "But I won't lie and say it's been easy. The scrutiny is intense. Every aspect of my life gets analyzed. People question my motives, my methods, my mental state. Some days it feels like too much, but you keep going." "I keep going because I get letters," Louise explained. "Hundreds of them. From young people who say the foundation saved their lives. From parents who finally understand their children's struggles. From teachers who now have resources to help their students." She pulled out her phone and showed James a message. This came today, from a 15-year-old girl who'd been planning to end her life. "She saw my speech and decided to reach out for help instead. She's in therapy now. She's doing better. She says she wants to meet me someday to say thank you." James felt emotion tighten his chest. "That's incredible. That's why I do this," Louise said simply. "For every person who feels less alone because someone finally said the quiet parts out loud." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the stars emerge. "Can I ask you something?" Louise said. "Why did you become a Royal Guard?" James thought about it. "Honestly, I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself, to serve and protect." It sounded noble, and is it? Noble? Most days it's routine, boring even. But sometimes... He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes you witness something extraordinary, and you realize you were exactly where you needed to be." Louise understood. Like that night in the ballroom. Like that night, James confirmed. "I could have walked away. Pretended I didn't hear anything, but I'm glad I didn't." "So am I," Louise said softly. Knowing someone saw that moment, the doubt, the fear, the determination, it made the whole thing feel more real. Like it actually happened. Not just in my imagination. "It happened," James assured her. "And you changed lives because of it," a voice called from inside the ballroom. "Catherine, looking for Louise." "I should get back," Louise said. "But Officer Whitmore." "James?" "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you for standing witness. For not turning away. For believing in this before anyone else did. I think you'll find quite a few people believe in it now." Louise smiled and headed back inside, but paused at the doorway. "You know what my grandmother used to say? That we're all just walking each other home. Every act of kindness, every moment of witness. Every time we choose connection over isolation, we're helping each other find our way." She disappeared into the ballroom, leaving James alone with his thoughts. He thought about that first night. Hearing a frightened young woman practice a speech she wasn't sure she could give, he thought about her courage in the face of opposition, her vulnerability in front of the world, her determination to turn personal pain into purpose. Lady Louise Windsor had been called the palace's secret weapon, the quiet royal who surprised everyone. But James knew the truth. She wasn't a weapon. She was a mirror. She reflected back to the world what they were all too scared to admit, that everyone struggles. Everyone doubts. Everyone needs help sometimes. And that being honest about our humanity is the most powerful thing we can do. Inside the ballroom, the event continued. Young people, connected, shared stories, found hope. The foundation that had started with one terrified woman practicing, alone in the dark, had become a beacon for thousands. James resumed his patrol, walking the familiar corridors with a new perspective. He'd spent 11 years guarding these halls, protecting royalty from external threats. But he'd learned something important over these past 6 months. Sometimes the most important protection you can offer someone isn't physical safety. It's bearing witness to their courage, standing by when they're afraid, believing in them when they doubt themselves. Lady Louise hadn't needed a guard that night in the ballroom. She'd needed a witness. And in witnessing her, journey from invisible to undeniable, from frightened to fierce, from silence to speaking, Truth James had been part of something far more important than routine security. He'd been part of a revolution. A quiet revolution, perhaps. But revolutions don't always announce themselves with fanfare. Sometimes they start with a whisper in an empty ballroom, a trembling voice finding strength, a young woman deciding that being seen was worth the risk of being judged. As James completed his rounds that night, past the ballroom one final time, the lights were dimmed now, the crowd gone. The space returned to its usual elegant emptiness. But he could still hear it, that voice, practicing in the darkness, finding courage in the echo. I stand before you today, not as a member of the royal family, but as someone who understands what it means to feel invisible. Lady Louise Windsor had made herself visible, and in doing so, she'd given millions of others permission to step into the light. That, James thought, was true royalty, not the crown you wear, but the lives you change, not the title you hold, but the hope you give, not the palace you live in, but the hearts you open. The ballroom fell silent once more, but its story would echo for generations, and somewhere, a young person struggling in silence would hear Louise's words and decide to hold on for one more day. That was everything. That was enough. That was the real magic of what happened in that empty ballroom 6 months ago, when one person's courage became everyone's hope, when invisibility became purpose, when a secret weapon revealed itself to be something far more powerful, a human being. Flawed and frightened and fierce, choosing to be seen and changing the world because of it.